The project that I'm working on is this rather beautiful blanket box, which actually was gifted to me by a good friend of mine whose late father, actually built this many years ago. And I feel such an air of responsibility. She knows that I paint furniture, but she wanted this still to exist and be loved, and it is going to be for us. So a couple of things that I'm going to do is just to pay homage to the creator of this piece and the beautiful wood. I'm going to strip the varnish off the top surface of this project, and I'm going to refinish it so we can see all of that beautiful wood grain. And the lower half, we're going to use the paint inlays. So I think it will just modernize it in a vintage kind of way, and I think it will sit in most people's homes really comfortably. So let's take a closer look at the project. Whilst I wait for the paint and varnish remover to do its thing, it's just behind me there, I'm going to focus on the colourway to the bottom of this chest. Now, I've decided to go with graphite, and this is the IOD paint inlay that I've decided to go with. Now, of course, the background colour will not be white, it will be the colour that I choose. But look at all of these beautiful colours in this pattern, which has sort of French linen and Paris grey tones, which I think will work beautifully with graphite. I think this one's called Grisal Toile. I don't know if I pronounced that right, guys. But look, on the back, the girls have used it with a black background. I know it's going to look fabulous. So the first thing that I've got to do is give my canvas coat before we start any of the inlay work. I am going to give the protruding panels here a couple of coats because I'm not going to put the inlay on there. I'm going to keep them to the aperture of each of these panels. And then when we lay down the inlay, we'll be laying a thick layer of paint to drop them into. So let's get this prep work done. Then we can move back to working out which colour chalk paint that I'll use for a stain. If I use one, haven't decided yet. We'll just marry the two up. Now time to remove the surplus varnish from the wooden top. As you can see here, I'm just using a scraper and applying it to a plastic container which I will seal up and take to my local council refuge, which can be disposed of in the correct manner. I usually go at least once every other month with my empty paint cans as well. Okay, so once you've removed all of your varnish from your timber, you will find that the grain is absolutely gorgeous. And in this case, it is stunning. I think probably oak. As you can see here, I've added some water to the timber so I could see the true colour of what this timber is going to look like once it's refinished. Now, I feel that this is too golden for my project, but I still want to see those beautiful grain marks. So I'm going to use chalk paint as a wood stain. I'm going to do this really, really quickly. Ordinarily, I would water down my chalk paint, but in this case, I'm going to wet the whole surface and then apply a coat of paint and then remove it with a damp cloth until I'm happy with seeing those lovely bits of grain shining through. It will look a lot darker because I'm choosing to go with graphite again. Graphite is a really good colour to knock out warmth. It's got a lot of cool tones in there. Also, if you're working on mahogany and you want a paler shade of wood, almost like this shade, then you would go in with Versailles or even French linen. Those two colours are fabulous as wood stains. So let's crack on with the wood stain. I'm going to wet the surface and then go in very quickly and remove with a damp cloth. Okay guys, so I know that you're all thinking he's taken all of that finish off and stained it and it looks exactly as it started, but trust me on this one, as the colour wash or stain dries, it will end up being more ashen and a much more cooler colour, and I can go in over the top with wax for a more mellow feel. Now onwards to the exterior of the blanket box, I am going to just repaint the edges and then we can prepare for the paint inlays. There's lots of trimming of the edges of the paint inlays, and then I'm going to choose my positioning of each pattern for each aperture, and then we can lay them into some graphite chalk paint. Whilst everything is drying, I am going to prepare my paint inlays. So each inlay, there's 8 sheets in one pack, has a small border that needs to be removed prior to organising your pattern. So let's take a look at the first one. Ooh, 2 cover sheets there, that's interesting. 2 cover sheets. So each inlay has a small border. I don't know if you can see this, the pattern just doesn't meet. So you have to remove all the way around the edges this border. Okay, so I'm going to start my first inlay to the surface of the blanket box. It did take a little bit of playing around with the pattern. You have to use the guide on the back of the packaging to see how the pattern lies. I have fudged it here and there. I want to get as much out of this pattern as possible. So I've got my first panel laid out just beside me, and I'm going to go in with my chalk paint pretty quick. I'm going to work to the aperture. And I'm also going to wet the underside. I did this last time. The girls suggest wetting the reverse side so the paper can stretch a little bit, but I'm going to stick with my method. I think it worked pretty well. So in with the graphite chalk paint, a healthy amount. You need to work pretty quick. If you're in a warmer climate, you need to really work quick with this because it needs to be wet paint that this sits into. I'll tidy up all of the edges afterwards. Basically, we just need to focus on allowing this paint inlay into the wet paint. I've changed my brush for a straight edge brush. This is just so I can get right into all of the crevices, not to miss anything. Time to start applying the first paint inlay, and as you can see, I'm using an atomizer on the paint side of the inlay, but you can spray the reverse side. This adds a little bit of stretch and it will help you place down that first inlay. It is always tricky, the first one, but once you've applied that first one, all of the others will slot into place just nice and easily. So I'm just going to run through my application and some of the ideas that I've come up with along the way of using the paint inlays. So one of which is to lay out your pattern so all of the corresponding connections meet on a flat surface, and then I'm laying all of that over the top of my aperture, the place that I want to apply the paint inlays, and then I'm using the gridded pattern on the reverse side of the paint inlays to make my Pacific cuts. Then I've laid this paint side up, giving it a slight spritz with my atomizer, then going back in with my wet chalk paint on the surface, and then turning over the paint inlays and laying them face down into the wet paint. Again, there's more stretch with the paper once you've added a touch of water, making sure that all of the connections are really good where they interconnect with one another. And then I will take a brayer just to smooth down any of the crinkles on the surface. Of course, a little bit more water, this will really help. Now time for the moment of truth. Whether these paint inlays have sunk into the paint well or not well, who knows, fingers crossed. You can tell when these are ready to be removed because it goes a little bit papery again and you can feel it's dry to touch. There will be a certain amount of moisture still underneath, so you've got to be very careful when removing them and allow them to dry. I'm going to go in with my atomizer just to moisten the carrying sheet, just so that it will release nice and smoothly. You could use a sponge or a cloth and be a little bit more directional about this, but in this case, I've only got one colour on my paint finish. I'm not too worried. I'm going to go in with the atomizer, so fingers crossed, guys. What you can see now is the paper will come sharp again. The darkness will start showing again. Look at the difference between the two. That tells you you've got enough moisture on there just to release the carrying sheet. Yeah, that's good. And what you've got to do is find an edge. We'll go up here on this small one first and just peel back. Gently does it. Slowly, slowly. And then I'm going to peel downwards. So far, so good, guys. Remember, keep all of your sheets. You can reuse these on smaller projects. It's got lots of lovely discrepancies in the paintwork, which I really like. Beautiful. Now, where I've overlapped along the bottom, I am going to go back in and touch up the graphite just a little bit to freshen. Let's go up here. The truly magical thing about using paint inlays is once you've got your image on the surface, all of that paintwork can still be very active, which means if you have a little connection line that you're not very keen on, you can go back in with a wet paintbrush and just move that paint around. So this is what I've done here, just to make all of those connections a little bit more seamless. There's just a few steps to go to complete my project. One of the things that I'd like to do to this is slightly distress the edges using a little bit of sandpaper just to knock down back to the wood. The other thing that needs to happen is we need to seal the paint inlays. Now I'm going to make it very easy. I'm going to use a spray lacquer from a can. You can mix down 50-50 water and lacquer, Annie Sloan lacquer, in a spray bottle just to seal these down. I am going to use wax over the top. I'm finding that this colour combination, maybe I got it wrong guys, I don't know, but this colour combination is quite sharp. It almost looks black and white, so I'm going to go in over the top of that with clear and dark wax to try and dull down some of this pattern. So let's crack on with the sanding, and then I'll seal this down, give it an hour, and then we'll go back in with the wax. All that's left to do now is marry the newly refurbished wooden top to the bottom. Thank you for joining me in today's tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to hit the subscribe and the notifications bell for future projects. Catch you next time.